All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, can we publish this to the attorneys?
All I see is a white screen. Is it on your laptop?
Yes.
Hold on a minute, we just have to switch it over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just to the witness and the attorneys?
The witness and the attorneys, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
And this, for the record, what exhibit number is this?
Judge, if we
It's not,
can,
oh, you don't, it's not in evidence yet? Okay.
it's not an evidence.
All right, thank you.
I can identify it, however.
Sure, okay.
Your Honor, if we could identify this as defense exhibit number 80.
80?
80.
Okay. We'll identify
I think
it.
that's a little out of line, but it's...
That's fine.
Okay. Good afternoon, Ms. Groff. I'm John Carroll. I represent Mr. Banfield in this case.
Good
If there are any
afternoon.
questions that I ask you and you don't understand them, please ask for me to repeat them.
Sure.
Okay. Ma'am, can you see the first slide there at your station?
Excuse me?
Did you see something on the screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And what have you seen that before?
Yes.
Okay. What were you, in terms of your ability to see that, was that in pictures?
This object or this one image or what's contained in the image?
This object and this image?
The object I saw in multiple images, including the body cams, videos, and I see it in this still image.
Okay. And you recognize that?
Yes.
Now, did you work with Detective Leech from the Fairfax County Police on this case?
I worked with him in the sense that I received, I believe, reports that he wrote, documentation of what type of analysis was done or submitted various items for, and had a conversation about a particular testing that he did.
Okay. And the particular testing, was that the testing that we just talked about in your cross-examination with the, what you said was a linear drip stain on the pants of Joe Ryan?
No.
Which stain was it?
It had to do with some socks that may or may not have been bloodstained, and that was the focus of our conversation.
Okay. And so how many conversations did you have with Detective Leech during this process?
I only remember one specific meeting that he was present where we had a one-on-one conversation about items in this case.
Okay. And was that here in Fairfax that this meeting
Yes.
took place?
Yes.
And were you present for that here, or were you in a virtual situation?
And I was present, physically present.
How long ago was that when you had your contact with Fairfax County PD?
When I talked to Detective Leech about this case,
Yes.
I don't remember the date, it's been some time ago.
Okay. Do you remember?
I don't remember the date, it's been some time ago.
Okay. Do you remember the date that you were previously here in Fairfax?
I remember what I was doing. I'd have to look up our calendar to see what date that was.
Did it coincide with another case that you were working for the Fairfax Commonwealth's Attorney's Office?
No, it was not another case.
Okay.
We were here doing some training
Okay. And training here in Fairfax?
in this area. I think it was Alexandria, maybe. I remember the physical facility. I don't remember the name of the location, but it was in this area.
Now, going back to this image, were you aware of, and I'll show you the next image, were you aware of Detective Leech asking for analysis for DNA on this juncture that's showing on the knife?
I was aware that some analysis was done. I did not talk to Detective Leech about specifically where or how the sample was collected. I think I may have looked at the results of the analysis,
Okay.
but I did not focus on this particular object.
And is it fair to say in your review of this that you looked at all of the results of the analysis that were produced in these cases? or in this case?
I don't know if I received copies of all the analysis that was done. Everything I received, I reviewed.
Okay. And in this situation, and Your Honor, I can...
Just want to mark it as
Well, what I was thinking I might do, Judge, is if we mark it A and then...
80A?
80A.
Okay, this can be 80A, that's fine.
And then 80B and going forward through.
Okay.
Okay,
How many?
and I'll
Okay.
identify it.
All right, so this is 80A, the one
Yes.
that's on the screen right now? Okay, thank you.
Ma'am, just to refresh your recollection, does that look like the analysis that you looked at?
Judge, I'm going to object.
Yep. Yes?
Best evidence, it's not the full document. The document's been admitted in evidence.
All right. Well, she needs to review the full document.
Okay.
We have it available.
Ma'am, to your recollection, whose DNA was, without referring to that, whose DNA was identified on that portion of the knife?
Again, it wasn't part of my analysis. I don't recall exactly what it was.
Your Honor, let me, this is the comments exhibit.
You got to be by a microphone. What?
Sorry, Your Honor, I'm going to look at the Commonwealth's exhibits because I think it's been introduced as one of the Commonwealth's exhibits. Aaron, if we could pull up Commonwealth's exhibit number 160.
I can't pull up anything.
Sorry,
I can't pull up anything.
I thought that was introduced into evidence.
Yeah, but we don't have their electronic files.
Yeah, I think it's on their.
This is not ours, this is the court's. If you want to use it, it's all here.
Ma'am, can I, Your Honor, if I may, I have the hard copy here. I'll just have her.
Okay, that's fine. I'll just switch it over to the lamp. Oh. You're just going to use the hard copy on the lamp? Is that?
Big pardon?
Oh, you're just going to give it to her, or are you going to use it on the
If I could
lamp?
just give it to her, that would be fine.
Okay, that's fine. 160, which I have is just lab sheet DNA blood.
It is lab sheet May 22, 2023.
Thank you.
Number 160.
All right, if you want to show her that, that's fine.
Ma'am, have you had enough to look at that? Does that refresh your recollection, ma'am?
Well, again, I don't know if this was one of the documents that I looked at. I'd have to look at my listing of the materials that I received. I recognize it as an analysis report, but I don't know if it's something I received
Okay.
or not.
In preparation for your testimony today, did you review the things that you had reviewed for testifying today?
I did look at my report. I didn't memorize the whole list of what I did receive.
So you're not certain of the specifics of the lab analysis relating to the knife in this case?
I don't recall the specifics of the knife, and as I said, I did not focus on the knife as part of my analysis as far as identifying patterns or, and as a result of that, whose DNA profiles might or might not be present.
And would DNA profiles, whether they're present or whether they were even tested for, would those be important in some of the determinations that you've made today?
In terms of the knife itself,
In terms of any aspect of it?
in terms of everything taken together, those bloodstain patterns that I talked about, if a DNA profile was identified, then I noted that based on the relevant analysis reports that I had.
And if there were stains that weren't examined, would those be important as to informing your conclusions?
Judge objection is to form, I don't believe it's clear, examined by whom?
If you could rephrase the question.
Okay. There's, in the scenes that you've seen on the body cam, there are numerous stains, correct?
Yes,
And many of them have been tested, many of them haven't been tested, correct?
that's correct.
And in fact, you directed testing for some of them in your relationship with Detective Leech, correct?
I don't recall directing Detective Leech which stains to sample or to have tested.
Did you identify a sample that you required Detective Leech to get tested?
Not that I recall. My analysis was based on the documentation, not personal examination of the physical objects.
Ma'am, did you have an opportunity to review what would be 80D? Do you see that picture?
I see the picture, yes.
Do you recognize that picture?
Yes,
Have you reviewed that as part of this case in your examination?
yes.
Okay. In this instance, this is the injury to, is this the injury to Joe Ryan in his left hand?
This is one injury to his left thumb.
Okay. And the contusion and the bruising, do you see that?
Yes, I see the contusions to the left thumb.
Okay. And in terms of your experience as a blood spatter analyst, blood spatter pattern analyst, is it fair to say there's a greater likelihood of injury to the person who's stabbing than someone who's, or to the person, there's greater likelihood of injury to the person who has the knife and is stabbing versus others involved in the scene?
I'm sorry, I'm not exactly clear on what the question is.
Is there, let me see if I can rephrase it. In your experience, is there a greater likelihood of a stabber having an injury as a result of that knife?
I can't really say greater likelihood.
Okay. Have you experienced that?
Not in something measured as a greater likelihood.
Okay. Have you experienced it in some other measure?
Well, that it's not uncommon for, in a stabbing situation, especially if there's no hilt on the knife,
Okay.
that multiple impacts can cause the weapon itself to become slippery because blood is a fluid and is wet. Their hand may slide and actually get cut.
Okay. And
Mr. Campbell, I just want to make sure, this is 80B, okay? 80B is in
I'm sorry,
Bravo.
yes, I was
Okay.
counting
I
ahead.
just want to get the record clean.
80B.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Would you agree that this is another view of that injury?
Yes,
That would
Appears
be
to be.
ADC, identified as ADC.
Thank you.
Ma'am, do you see this, the slide that's before you?
no, sir.
Do you see the slide that's before you now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you recognize this, this particular picture from the body cams that you looked at?
This does appear to be a still portion of one of the body cams.
Okay, and this would be identified as ADD? Ma'am, looking at ADD, do you see my client there?
Well, I recognize that the person, there is a person kneeling on the floor, and in looking at all the videos of the first officers, that person was later identified as Brendan Banfield.
Okay, and in that picture, can you see his hands?
I'm sorry, this particular image is very dark, difficult to see, but in the overall body cams, I did see his hands.
Okay, and are you saying that you don't see his hands in this picture?
I'm saying this picture is not really clear to show his hands. I see the area that I think is his hands, but the picture itself is not clear.
Okay, and do you see the backside of his hands?
I'm sorry, this picture is not clear enough to make a determination.
Okay, well, let's look at the blood stain down to his right. Do you see the portion that we've been talking about? And just, if you need to look at where everything is situated in order to orient yourself, do you see the corner of the bed?
I can make out the area where the corner of the bed should be.
Okay, and can you make out the area where the saturated blood stains that you were talking about is?
I can see what appears to be. Again, the picture quality is very poor.
Okay.
But from reviewing all the body cams, I do know that there was saturation areas on the carpet.
Okay, so just talking about this picture right here, this comes from when you reviewed the body cam, correct?
I reviewed all the body cam footage that was given to me for review.
And this footage is from the first body cam responder, isn't that correct?
Objection, Judge. I think it calls for speculation. She's indicated she has reviewed all of the body cam, but there has been no indication as to which body cam this came from.
If she can answer it.
The body cams of the first two officers going into the bedroom had the most information about location of persons and objects before being moved by the officers or being directed to be moved by the officers.
Okay, and in this picture, which would be ADD again, you can see the stained spot that you were talking about with the ladies and gentlemen of the jury earlier, correct?
Again, the quality of this picture is very poor, but I do know where there were saturations on the carpet based on all of my review of materials in this case.
Can you see the end of the bed?
I see what I think is the footboard of the bed.
Okay, can you see what's on the bed?
In this picture, you just see that it's a dark object. Based on the totality of the documentation, I know what that object is.
Okay, and what object is that?
It was a handgun.
Okay. And do you know which of the handguns that it was?
Yes.
Okay, which one?
Based on all of the documentation I had, this would be the gun that was Mr. Banfield's identified as his duty weapon.
The Glock 19M, would that be it?
That sounds right.
Okay. Now, just looking at what we know about this, so you know where the gun is, even though you're saying it's a dark object. And that's, you know where the corner of the bed is, correct?
I know that the firearm, when first officers arrived in the scene, it was laying on the southeast corner of the mattress.
Okay. And so you know where the blood stain is related to the southeast corner of the mattress, correct?
The blood stain was later identified on the sheet removed from the mattress.
Do you know, we're talking about the saturated blood stain that you spoke about quite often in your direct testimony that's at the foot of the corner of the bed.
Yes, there were multiple saturation stains on the carpet.
Okay.
One was near the southeast corner of the bed on the carpet.
Okay. And were you also, did you also review the 911 tape of the call from Fairfax County, or to Fairfax County?
I did listen to 911 recording.
Okay. Do you recall my client's statements about shooting an unknown person in the room?
I don't remember the specific verbiage. I remember that there was a reference to an injured person and a shooting.
Okay. And I'm not that worried about the detail, but what I am interested in is when he identified himself as shooting Joe Ryan, the police said, "Where are the guns now?" Do you recall that?
I don't specifically recall.
Okay. Do you recall them telling whomever is on the 911 tape, make sure the guns are visible?
Again, I don't remember the exact wording of the call.
Okay. And so you don't actually remember that from the 911 about the gun?
I don't remember the specific words that were said. I do remember specifically reviewing that there was reference to an injured person in a shooting, that was the basis for officers going to the scene.
Okay. And so would it be possible if that gun that's showing on the corner of the bed was put in the blood stain saturation that you've talked about today prior to making the 911 call?
Well, I don't know prior to the 911 call. Those are things that I can't know.
Okay.
I will say that the blood stain all along that complete side of the gun, the exposed side as you're looking at it, that it did have what appeared to be transfer. And certainly if the gun had been laid in a saturation or in a blood pool, then that would be a scenario that could not be excluded as how the blood stains came to be on that side of the gun.
Okay. And if that was left in the position that's in for purposes of the first responders, would that be something that could be tested to determine what the DNA was on, that gun itself?
If the gun itself, as it's laying there, someone could swab it and submit that swab for analysis.
Do you know if that ever happened?
That I don't know.
Okay. You never received any records of an analysis of what was on the gun?
I don't recall getting analysis of any swabbing of the gun itself.
Okay. But that would have been the most direct way to determine if there was blood or blood of a certain person or some other basis upon which to draw a conclusion if that was swabbed, correct?
To determine the DNA profile, that would be, I would think, a preferable method would have been to swab it there as it's laying there. However, the gun was not left in that position. So,
Okay.
so there were some other things to consider as far as what would be tested and what would not be tested.
Oh, so When you're talking about not being left in this position that's showing here, you're talking about when the first responders moved it to the other side of the bed?
It was officers that moved it, and this gun was moved twice.
Okay.
Based on the body cams, that's what I saw.
Okay. But the DNA analysis of this area, including those saturated, soaked blood stains, I think there were 2 of them. There are a number of other stains on the mattress. The only one that was tested was the one that's right underneath the gun, where on the bedding that was underneath the gun. Isn't that correct?
Okay. If I can take them one at a time. I did not see stains on the mattress. That simply wasn't included in images that I saw of the scene. The images that I saw, I could not identify blood stains on the mattress or on that sheet that was on the bed. There was more than 2 saturations on the carpet. Trying to remember what else you put in there.
Yeah, so I'll work with you on that. Let's go through it. The 2 big saturations on the carpet. You never saw any testing of those 2 big saturations, correct?
I'm sorry, I really don't recall. I have to go back to see if any of those were specifically tested. The one directly in front of the chest of drawers would really be no reason to test that, because in the context of the scene, we know the source.
Okay.
The one closest to the foot of the bed could be tested either by sampling the saturation of the carpet itself, or there was some clothing that was partially covered some saturation, but also was stained, and that could be tested for DNA. And then there's saturation over by the dog bed that's a distance away.
Okay. And would it surprise you to know that none of those saturated positions were tested?
I wouldn't be surprised at that.
But that would give you information that would be helpful in arriving at whatever conclusion you're trying to arrive at, right?
That depends on the extent of the analysis. Like I said, the one stain pattern, there's really no reason to test, because we could see in the context of the scene, particularly in the body cams, the source of that, because the source was laying in that area when officers arrived. The other could be tested, as I say, either directly from the carpet itself or objects on the carpet that were also stained.
Now, the firearm itself, that would be something that you would probably want to be tested, correct?
I would probably have preferred that it be tested directly from that, but also consider the fact that it was moved twice by officers in the scene. So before I would look at any results on that, I'd want to know more about the officers moving it to be sure that they didn't disrupt it. That's certainly a consideration, and look at the pattern, if not the DNA.
And just so you're clear, you're talking about it being moved twice after what we're seeing on this picture, which is at the corner of the bed.
Yes, it was moved twice after officers initially entered the bedroom.
And is it possible that the gun in the position that you can see my client, even though it's dark, that gun was to his right-hand side, laying in that pool of blood that had saturated that carpet prior to it being put up on the bed?
I don't know where the gun was prior to it being put on the bed. It is generally to his right, as we're looking at where I know he was positioned in the room.
Okay. And you know that he had blood on his hands, correct?
He did have blood on his hands.
And in fact, I know you're not happy with the quality of this picture, but in other pictures that you've seen his hands with blood on the front side and blood on the back side, correct?
Yes, his hands, both hands were blood covered.
Okay. And that would be consistent with someone who's rendering aid before first responders come, isn't that right?
It's consistent with him having blood on his hands.
Okay.
He did, looking at the first officer entering the room, he did have his hands on her neck.
Okay. And that was, that was something that he did until the officer said, we're going to take over now, correct?
Well, when the first officer arrived, he was there with his hands on her neck, and then an officer directed him to move away, and then the officer took over trying to render aid.
Okay. So let's talk about Castoff. Is that what you call it?
Castoff is a bloodstained term.
Okay. And you spoke about Castoff and how it could be a linear pattern, or what you saw was a linear pattern. And so Castoff is coming off of a, if you could just remind me again, what was your definition of Castoff?
Well, the mechanism of cast-off is when some object that has wet blood on it is in motion.
Okay.
And so as it moves, blood comes off in a column, in a ligament, of blood will come off, break into individual droplets as it travels through air.
Okay.
And because it comes off of basically one point or one area, then when it lands on a surface, those individual droplets, as they form on the surface, will make a linear or curvilinear pattern.
Okay. And so if you have a surface that has a lot of blood, say hands, and you do this, can cast-off occur?
Cast-off can be any object that has wet blood on it. A finger,
Okay.
if it's a hand, then usually we'll see like more than one linear distribution
Okay.
for, say, blood coming off, depending on which fingers they are, how many. Or it can be some other object that has blood on it that's in motion, and
Sure.
then blood comes off of that object.
And just for the court reporter, I'm just going to describe what you just did and what I did, and if I'm incorrect, please correct me. When I talked about cast-off, I talked about moving my hands in a snapping fashion away from my body, or it could be downward. And when you were describing that, you were saying it could be a hand, any finger, or all fingers going off of that object, correct?
Yes, any object that has wet blood on it and the object is in motion so that blood comes off of the object could produce cast-off.
Okay, thank you. Now, and I guess with cast-off, what I think you've identified as droplets in a linear type pattern is the words you were saying to direct examination?
That individual stains in the pattern oriented to each other will be in a linear or curvilinear pattern.
Okay. And a linear pattern, I'm just assuming what, I guess, you're talking about straight or likely straight.
Well, I say it could be linear or curvilinear, so a part of the pattern could be very straight. You could have a part where the whole line curves a bit, so it's curvilinear, but you can still, looking at it, see how they're related to each other.
Okay. And unless you actually see whatever it is that's holding that blood, you can't be certain of that, correct?
You cannot generally look at a cast-off pattern by itself to determine what the object was, other than looking at the individual stains. This came off of it's a low volume or very small surface area versus something that has a large surface area.
Okay. Now, now, when you're talking about the surface, and the surfaces that you're talking about in this case, is you have the wall, correct?
I'm sorry, the surface area I was just referring to was the surface bearing the blood.
I understand, and I'm just moving on to surfaces that could create what you ultimately interpret. Like the wall, for example. That would be a clean surface if blood hit that, right?
Judge, objection to the mischaracterization of the answer. Her answer was about what type of object could create cast-off.
Right, and he's moving on now.
Yeah, I'm moving
This is
on.
a new
Understood, but to then use the word create, what she's talking about, I think,
Overruled.
okay.
So just so I'm clear, I don't want to confuse, we're talking about surfaces. So like a surface like this, or a surface like this, or a surface of skin, okay? So that would be like a tabletop, clothing, fabric, and skin.
So,
So I haven't asked the question yet.
okay,
Depending on what surface you're talking about, would it be easier to identify whether it's a linear pattern or even whether it's a drop pattern, excuse me if I'm not using the right term, when you're talking about like a wall or a flat surface like this versus clothing and say denim, like what we have in this case, or a forearm, what we have in this case? There'd be different.
Objection to the compound question.
Overruled, he hasn't asked the question yet.
I haven't asked the question yet, yeah. Would there be different things that you would consider based upon the surface that you're analyzing in coming at your conclusions?
but in looking at bloodstains, all of them, you should consider the target surface, that is the surface receiving the blood, and how it might alter a bloodstain. And again, it goes back to things like the volume of blood in the Castoff. Even something that might be absorbent like denim, if it's a very small volume, then it may not be enough blood to really be disrupted when it strikes that surface. It really depends on several factors.
Okay.
I think there was another portion to your question, but I've forgotten now.
Well, I think the actual question was in making your conclusions as to some of the things that you've said today, whether it's a circular stain, whether it's a elliptical stain, I think you talk about, or if it's a transfer stain. Would the surface have an effect on each of those different possible patterns? Or
Yes.
how you identify them?
Target surface is an important consideration with any bloodstain pattern. How will this particular surface affect the blood as it's transferring from a fluid to a drying stain on the surface? So surface is important. In terms of linear, we're looking for not just on a flat surface, but linear distributions can be identified on contoured surfaces, or a solid surface versus an absorbent. In the context of the scene, you may or may not be able to make that determination.
Now, you referenced a DLI report in your direct testimony. It was a private lab that the Commonwealth hired to do an examination. Do you remember that one?
Yes, I remember some of the reports were DLI.
Okay, well, there was only one, and the one was relating to the DNA that was being sought inside Joe's zipper in his button of his pants. You remember that?
I don't recall it being inside the zipper. It was identified to me that some sample in the area of the button or in that area was in fact sampled, and that they did find DNA profiles.
Okay, and did you read that report?
I think I did.
Okay, isn't it true that the request for the analysis was actually not blood stains? The request for the analysis was around the blood stains for contact or touch DNA. Do you remember that?
I don't recall anything in it that says specifically how it was sampled.
Okay, so, but what my question is You spoke about transfer stains to the Commonwealth when they asked the question. You spoke about inside the zipper where the button connects, all those sorts of things. And you spoke about blood transfer stains, didn't you?
I said on the back side of the buttonhole that I could see in the image transfer stains.
Okay.
I did not say what DNA was present in those transfer stains, just that there was a report in that area, and I think it was the button side as opposed to the buttonhole side.
But my question is, did you realize that the request for DNA was not for any blood stains? It was for touch DNA around that area that was described.
Judge, objection, facts not in evidence.
Overruled if she can answer.
Did you realize that?
As I said, I wasn't a party to sampling. I don't know exactly how the sampling was done.
Okay. Well, I guess my question then is, how did it just automatically talk about transfers in that area when that wasn't part of any sort of scientific testing done by the Commonwealth of Virginia or their hired DNA person?
Judge, I'm sorry, I have to object. He is mischaracterizing what is in the certificate of laboratory
Legal
analysis.
objection, Ms. Hands.
Facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
I testified that I saw stains, particularly on the back side of the buttonhole.
Okay.
And looking at those stains, identified that as transfer stains.
And despite the fact that the DNA lab didn't deal with stains at all, was that something that you dealt with the Commonwealth in preparation? Is that why you talked about stains?
I identified the stains because I looked at the picture and I saw the stains and I said what I saw. That
Okay.
is a separate issue from any testing that may have been done for DNA in that area.
Now, we looked at the hip stain that you identified previously, and you were testifying. It was on his Joe Ryan's hip. You testified that there were like fingers that were going down because you could conclude that the flow was going down toward the ground where the picture was, correct?
No, I said there was a blood stain on his left hip, and there was a satellite, what appeared to be satellite with a little bit of flow from that, and that direction of those flows was towards the floor, or in terms of the body relative to his body was front to back. I did not say that that was a contact, and certainly did not say it was from fingers.
Now, did you review any evidence that informed you as to what Joe Ryan's movement was before blood was on him?
There's no way looking objectively at the evidence for me to determine what he was doing before there was any bloodshed.
Okay. If the evidence was that after he was shot, he started getting up again, so we would have blood, and he was starting to get up from his position on the floor, would that be something that you would want to consider in making some sort of a conclusion for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Any statement about what he may or may not have done would not have any bearing on looking at the bloodstains and looking at what I could determine, any actions I could determine based on those bloodstain patterns.
So when you're receiving this case, you're not talking about what the homicide detectives in this case would have already found at the time that you started working with them.
I don't know what the homicide investigators themselves found or thought they had found. I was presented the documentation and I analyzed that documentation.
Okay.
And I don't recall ever having a discussion with any of the homicide investigators about what they thought they had found.
Okay. Sorry, bear with me. It says here that you were provided the chief medical examiner's reports, correct?
Yes,
You were provided a DNA map from Detective Terry Leech, correct?
yes.
You were provided a blood location map from Terry Leech, correct?
A blood location map, I don't recall that.
Okay, well, if it was in your report that you wrote and it says that you received that, would you feel like that was reliable?
It's his opinion. It doesn't have a bearing on what I do. I look at the documentation separately from any of opinions that he may have formed.
Okay. And so it looks as though you were provided 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You were provided 10 certificates of analysis from the Department of Forensic Science, including the DLI case of June 1st, 2023. I'm sorry. You were provided 15 certificates of analysis, including DLI, who was a private lab, and Bodie, who was a private lab. You received those, correct?
Yes, I would have to refer to my report, but I listed everything I received.
Okay.
That doesn't mean everything I listed had a bearing on my analysis, simply that I had received it.
Okay, and I'm actually reading from that portion of your report, so I'm not trying to trick you and do anything like that. It says you have images of Juliana Peres Magalhães, 31 images.
Okay.
You have images of Brendan Banfield, 180 images. Does that sound right?
There were a number of images. I don't recall the
Okay.
exact number. I'd have to refer to my report.
I'll go through them quickly because I know you can't just in the moment. 137 images of Christine Banfield, 177 images of Joe Ryan. You have 1,326 scene images. You have evidence examination images, 1951. Evidence images, 308. X-rays of Christine Banfield and Joe Ryan, correct? You have,
Yeah, if you're reading the list, then yes, that would be correct.
okay. You have 40 Axon body cams from the police department, 37 fleet cams, Axon interview cams. Now, that's what I'm asking about, the Axon interview cams. Those would be interviews relating to this investigation and the evidence that was being compiled as they went on, right?
There were some interview cams of interviews when they were done by some detective to some interviewee, and yes, I looked at those.
Okay, and those interview cams, if they contained the factual predicate that I said to you sometime earlier, that Joe Ryan had gotten up from his position on the floor before he was shot by Juliana Peres Magalhães, would that change your position with regard to what you've described on the hip, if he was in an upright position versus laying down as he was in the picture?
No, the blood stain is what it is. I simply described what it is and what that tells me about this small portion of the scene. Any statements that anyone makes, I do not take as being factual.
Okay,
That's
And so-
subjective as opposed to objective evidence.
thank you. And so, going along with what you said, the pictures of Joe Ryan laying on the bed and you, the dog bed where the saturation stain was, do you recall it?
There was a saturation on the dog bed, especially to his left and onto the carpet.
Okay, and so you ended up drawing flow patterns that were going down his neck, correct?
I
Do you remember?
I looked at those and I showed where those were to focus the attention on them.
Okay, and that was for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, right?
Yes?
Okay, and so let's just go through some of those flow patterns. So when the flow patterns are coming straight down off of his chin, down his neck, that would suggest to you that he was upright?
Not necessarily. He could be laying on his back and have flow,
Okay.
depending on the position of his head, if it's to the right, to the left, or straight up.
And we're talking about a head wound to the right-hand side, right?
Yes,
Okay. And we're talking about flow patterns that would go down, and then there were some that went down and down the jawline, correct?
there was
You
some,
remember?
there were some that were kind of downward from the left side, then there were some from the left traveling over towards the right, and there were some from the right that went what looked to be pretty much straight up and down if you took the body and oriented in the anatomic position.
Okay. And so those flow patterns that you drew for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury were to show different possibilities or different, different positions, I guess, that blood would have been coming down his face?
We're simply showing what's there. This is what the flows were, and the fact that they're in different directions indicated that there was movement.
Okay. So anything on the right-hand side, would the shot through his temple and the blood and everything that came from that, would that cover what happens on the right-hand side?
If his head was upright at the time, then blood could flow from the wound down, pretty much straight down. That's one possibility.
And I know you reviewed the medical examiner's report. Did you see the portion where she opined that there was aspiration of blood? There'd been blood going down into his throat?
I would expect that there would be, and looking at the blood stains on his face, there are some stains, especially just around the lips, that look like they could be aspirated, and, I'm sorry, expirated.
Expirated, yes.
That means that any time that there's fluid, blood, and air is forced through that, such as blood in the throat, and he's trying to exhale, then that produces little bubbles, if you will, coming up, and then they fall back. If he's on his back, they'd fall back in the same position, and you see this little kind of sort of pockmarked looks in the blood, and that's one way of looking at expirated blood.
But that could be another another source of blood for what you drew down his neck, correct?
Well,
Is it possible?
I wouldn't expect for expirated blood, as in just exhaling through blood, to have enough volume that you would have flow from that.
So you're saying that that's not possible?
I said I would not expect there to be enough volume in an expirated
Okay.
blood stain that you would actually have
Okay.
in a situation where if you're talking about someone who's basically not active at that point.
Okay, well, and okay. So are you saying it's not possible that any of those lines that went down his neck would not have been from aspiration blood? Are you saying it's not possible?
I would say that I would not expect expirated blood to have the flow, to present that kind of flow, especially where we look at where it's coming from the side. And I really wouldn't expect that much volume. If he's laying on his back and expirating through the blood, that you have enough volume to flow down his chin.
And if he was not laying on his back, would that change your expectation is the way you want to answer it?
If he's, say, upright, then I would expect expirated blood to be going away from his face as opposed to coming back to his face.
Okay.
So I really would not expect that.
So when I ask the question, is it possible, you answer, I wouldn't expect to see it. But can you answer my question? Is it possible that expirated blood came out of his mouth down on any of those, depending on how the head was facing?
I think if blood is coming from his mouth, in a situation where you could have expirated blood, then there could be a volume of blood in the mouth, and that volume of blood could overflow and produce flow, say, down his chin.
Okay, so it's possible.
It's possible from blood
Okay, that's
to
what I
come from
wanted
the
to get
mouth.
to.
It's
Thank
not
you.
expirated, but it is possible for it to come from the mouth.
Your Honor, I'm going to X out of this.
All right.
Are you able to see a picture on your screen?
It's just your screensaver.
Okay, sorry. Let me see if I can change that. Ma'am, can you see those two pictures side by side?
Yes,
Okay, do you recognize those pictures?
yes,
Okay. In the picture on the right, we've taken a look at, in a different form, the Commonwealth's version. And in those droplets, you've described them as droplets of blood in a linear-like pattern.
in a linear distribution.
Linear distribution, thank you. And then, do you recognize the other picture?
Yes,
And that's also a portion of a picture that you've already looked at.
yes,
Now, the one, I guess, droplet in the left picture, you've described as airborne, correct?
yes,
But the droplets that you have on the right side, and Your Honor, I would identify this as Defense Exhibit 83.
83, you're not going alphabet anymore?
This is a different,
Okay, 83, okay.
I think, because we were at 82.
No, we were at 80, A, B, C, D, and E.
Oh,
is
I'm
where
sorry,
we're
then
stuck.
this would be 81.
This is 81, okay, no 80. All right.
Ma'am, the picture on the right side, you say that these are droplets in a linear, and you just said it,
distribution.
distribution, thank you. But the droplet that in the left one is airborne distribution, correct?
Well, I'm sorry, the one on the left is not a distribution, it is a stain.
Okay, so it's an airborne stain.
All of
Correct.
those you're talking about are airborne, whether they're droplets on the, as we look at on the picture on the right, or the picture on the left, airborne in that the droplet traveled through air, even if that travel is downward.
So they're all airborne droplets.
Those are, yes.
Okay, and so there's no distinction between the droplet portions on either picture in your mind?
Well, in terms of defining whether or not they're airborne, they're all airborne. That is, the droplets travel through air, even if that travel was straight down.
Now, the other part of the picture on the right was, I think you had testified, actually, strike that. I'll just leave that as that. Your Honor, court's indulgence for one moment.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, you can take that picture down. No further questions.
All right, redirect.
George Penn? Judge, if we can display what was previously admitted as Commonwealth's 222, I believe under seal.
222 is not under seal.
Judge, it probably, okay, that's fine.
It was in or not under seal, 222.
That's fine. Ms. Dallegraf, hi. So let's kind of go in reverse here. Where he left off was with what you see on your screen. Let me make it big so we're looking at just that. Mr. Carroll was drawing your attention to this droplet here. Is that correct?
Yes,
And was comparing it to then the droplets that we see on Mr. Ryan's arm. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay, and I think perhaps there was just a little bit of confusion talking about blood in flight, blood in the air. When we looked at 222, the picture and the portion of the picture that you were drawing our attention to referencing flow, gravity, and the position of the body is this lower stain on his hip. Is that correct?
It's the one that shows any type of a flow associated with it is the one that's on the lateral side or the side of the outside side of his left hip. And it's that particular stain clearly is larger than the stains that we were just talking about Airborne could be falling,
Okay.
from above, so.
Do you believe that the stain that we see to the left on Mr. Ryan's hip is part of the pattern that leads us then to the droplet of blood that we see on the right?
I don't see that as forming a pattern.
Okay. Do you believe that they happened at the same time?
Well, a pattern, if I could define my
Please.
term, a pattern is a group of stains that are related to each other that happen from a single mechanism, a single incident. These are different mechanisms to produce this, and therefore it's not the same. Whether or not they're simultaneous in time is a different issue.
Okay. So then let's talk about the mechanism. Were these droplets produced by the same mechanism?
But depends on which droplets that you're talking
Sorry,
about.
let me be clear. The droplets that we see to the right of our screen on his abdomen, were they produced by the same mechanism as the area of blood, the stain that we see on his hip with the flow lines coming from it down towards the floor?
They don't appear to be the same mechanism.
Okay, thank you. So back at the beginning, Mr. Carroll asked you about your report, and we started with the knife. Let me ask you, do you recall when did you produce your report to Fairfax County Police?
I don't remember the date of the report. It's been some time ago.
Do you have a copy of your report with you?
No, I do not.
Okay. Do you have any documents with you that would refresh your recollection?
No, I do not.
Did you leave it back here?
I do have a digital copy back there.
If you refreshed your recollection with the digital copy, would that enable you to answer the question about when the report was produced?
Yes?
Your Honor, if I may retrieve her digital copy. Thank you. If I may approach. Thank you. All right, when did you produce your report for the Fairfax County Police Department?
Report date August 21, 2024.
All right, thank you. And you did not examine the knife. You said it was not part of your analysis, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, why not?
Because in the body cam video, there were multiple places that showed where the knife was altered, if you will, by officers in the scene. That is, officers coming in, walking in the area where the knife was. You see the knife in one orientation, then another orientation. It gets flipped over, it gets pressed down. So based on that, anything that's on the knife could have been transferred from the floor to the knife. There's also bedding, fabric that's on the floor, part of which has saturations to it. So that could have transferred from that to the knife. So there were so many alterations that could be seen in the body cam that would confuse anything that we get from the knife. So we don't know if, say, the bloodstains on the knife were there before officers arrived, or if it happened as a consequence of the knife being moved as the officers are coming in and with their footwear, hitting it, pushing it, stepping on it, and so forth.
All right. At the same time, Mr. Carroll asked you about swabbing the gun, and you indicated that you did not observe any samples taken from the gun. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was not a party to the sampling itself.
All right, but you did receive DNA results from testing performed on the sheet underneath where the gun was resting when police entered the room. Is that correct?
If I may refer.
Yes, that's fine.
Well, sorry, it doesn't list it as far as, the items are not listed with the name of the report, and I don't think I included in my report anything about that particular stain. I didn't see the stain. I didn't see it in the body cam and the still images in the scene, and I don't recall getting pictures of the sheet itself where someone else looked
Okay.
at that, so that wouldn't be, I'm not going to analyze something I didn't actually look at.
Sure, understood. But you did receive the certificate of laboratory analysis indicating that that sheet was tested.
I remember being aware that there was testing based on a pattern that someone else saw in the evidence examination outside the scene.
Okay, and that certificate of analysis was reflective of the results of testing the sheet from the gun's first position on body-worn camera, is that correct?
Well, again, I only know that from things I've heard said. I didn't see the pattern on the sheet,
Sure.
so I didn't make an analysis of the pattern because I didn't have it to look at. If someone else did that, and which I was told that they did, and that they had submitted something for analysis, okay.
All right. Mr. Carroll asked you, though, about would you have preferred to have the gun tested? You indicated sure, all things being equal. But is there any reason why a test result on the gun would have been unreliable?
Well, again, I can't evaluate something I didn't look at. So one possibility is that looking at the condition of the gun as it's laying on the sheet, it is covered on the one side. If then it's had the same stain pattern on the opposite side, then it certainly could have transferred blood from the side of the gun to the sheet, and then it would be reliable to say it come from that. But not having looked at that pattern myself, I really can't say. There could be other transfers, assuming it was a transfer, and I don't know because I didn't see that pattern.
Sure. I guess what I'm asking is, you testified that you observed the gun being moved from that location. Is that correct?
I observed it being moved twice by officers in the scene.
So if testing had occurred after those movements, is there any reason to think it might not have been reliable?
I have nothing to base an opinion on.
Okay. All right. So you also were asked if it was possible that the blood on the gun had come from the stain on the floor. And you answered that yes, that was a possibility, correct?
Looking at the side of the gun as it's laying on the mattress, it's consistent with a transfer front to back on the gun, fully that side of the gun. And one possibility for that is that it was in fact on a saturation stain, or it possibly could have been a blood pool or some other transfer, because it appears to be a transfer pattern on the full side of the gun.
Is it possible that that transfer pattern was created by a bloody hand?
I didn't see anything that in the pattern that would tell me it was a bloody hand, unless it's a hand in motion, and it really I didn't see striations that I could identify motion. So I don't know if just bloody hand contacting the gun would be right or not. If it's a transfer just from holding a gun in normal position, I wouldn't expect it to have all along the full length front to back. As long as you're holding it in the normal position, I would expect a bloody hand to transfer blood around the grips and possibly a portion of the slide, especially directly above, below the trigger, or just above the trigger guard. That's normally what we see in bloody hands handling a gun. In this case, it looks like a transfer full front to back length. That looks a little bit more like a broader surface, like on a saturation stain or in a blood pool. But other than that, I don't have enough information to make any further determination.
Okay, thank you. If we go back for a moment, Mr. Carroll asked you about the injury on Mr. Ryan's thumb and whether or not it was consistent with injuries sustained by someone who's using a knife. You explained what did the injuries look like from slippage on a knife?
Typically, if you're looking at a knife slipping, a person wielding a knife, especially repeated blows, without a hilt on the knife, then their hand may slip down, usually down the blade, and they could get a cutting injury themselves. That's not an uncommon thing in multiple stabbing situations.
In your review of Mr. Ryan's autopsy, did you see any such wounds?
No.
All right. Mr. Carroll asked you about testing the blood saturation stains on the carpet in front of the dresser and the stain closest to the foot of the bed. You indicated that there was no reason to test the stain in front of the drawers because we know the source. Can you elaborate? Who was the source?
Well, I would say the source would be Christine Banfield, because when officers come in, where you see that saturation in front of the chest of drawers is where her upper body was. And we could see that Mr. Banfield had his hands on her neck when the officers first came. They immediately have him move and take over, trying to assist, and therefore knowing from the autopsy what type of wound that is and everything, then that it would be predictable that a saturation would be in that area. So when you see that, finding any other DNA profile in there would be difficult to explain in terms of the scene. Traces of someone else might be there, but the blood itself, we can see the source.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll asked you, after demonstrating with his hands a particular movement, whether or not Castoff, like that found on the walls, like that found on Mr. Banfield's pants, could have been created by the handshaking motion that he demonstrated. You indicated what? Was that a possibility?
Okay, one, I did not identify a cast-off on the wall. There were some elliptical stains, just separate from anything else, so I can't really categorize that other than there's some elliptical stains. Cast-off can be from any blood-bearing surface that's in motion, such that blood comes off of it, whether it's a single point, a point of a finger, the point of a knife, any other object that has wet blood on it, it's in motion, that blood comes off. If it's flicking of the hands, and if they have bloody fingers, then I would expect to see probably multiple lines that would show that it came off of something of a continuous space, so lines from each one that is more than one point. But it's any object in motion, so even identifying cast-off doesn't tell you what created the cast-off. Sometimes in a scene context, it could be narrowed down to one object, but many times you have to say, okay, it could be this or it could be that. There could be multiple items.
Judge, if we can pull down the photo for just a moment. And if we can look at Commonwealth's previously admitted 185. And if I can have that displayed, please.
I don't have a 185.
I'm sorry?
I don't have a 185.
Okay. If I can have the court's indulgence for just a moment.
All right.
$186.
I have a 186, yes.
All right, thank you. Ms. Dallygraph, is this cast-off pattern consistent with someone's hands shaking away from their body?
Well, it's consistent with, for one, it's not just one pattern. There are multiple lines there, and some object, blood-bearing object, in motion so that blood comes off.
All right. Could that object have been a knife?
I can't exclude a knife if there's a blood-bearing surface of the knife and the knife is in motion. That's one possibility.
Mr. Carroll asked you if there had been evidence that after Mr. Ryan was shot, he had started to get up. Would that have had bearing on your analysis? And do you recall your answer?
Yes, I said, I only look at the objective evidence. So if I had seen that evidence, it would be described in my report. So it's not based on any statement that anybody made.
All right, and so that objective evidence was not provided to you, is that correct?
Well, the bloodstains are what they are. And if I don't see a bloodstain that specifically shows me that he was upright, then I can't say that he was upright.
Based on your review of all of the evidence, could Mr. Ryan have gotten up after he was shot?
Objection, Your Honor. I mean, this is
If you want to
going to,
approach.
Let me ask the question again, just so you recall. Could Mr. Ryan have gotten up after he was shot?
Which time?
Either.
It's entirely possible that he would be mobile after the first shot because that shot went behind his eyes and did not incapacitating. That is, it did not approach the brainstem, it did not take out the midbrain, it did not destroy the cerebellum, it did not sever the spinal cord, it did not shock the spinal cord. It's simply behind the eyes. So there is certainly an open possibility that he could move after that shot.
How about the second shot?
Well, after the shot to the chest, the evidence indicates that they recovered a bullet from the spine and that the spinal cord had a concussion at that point, and that wound path included perforations to the heart, to the pericardium, and so forth. But especially that it would have hit the spine, that he would not be able to get up from that.
So could Mr. Ryan, after receiving the shot to his chest, and Judge, I'd like to share Commonwealth's 241, previously admitted, under seal. Could he have put his hands in that position?
This is it's not exactly a yes or no question,
All right.
because could a person fall back with their hands on their chest? That's a possibility. Could they do that and have all the other blood stains where they are? That doesn't work together.
That does not work together?
Well, he has to some way have all this blood on his face and be in a different position so that you get blood on the left side of his face, not just the right side. And now he's laying here. So the answer is I don't see how with both of those together. I mean, there's a sequencing issue then, especially if we determine that the head shot was in fact the first and then the chest shot. So.
Can you explain, I'm sorry, you said there's a sequencing issue. What is that sequencing issue?
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
All right, I'll sustain his objection
All right.
at this point.
To understand your testimony, if he had fallen like that, his hands could be in that position. Is that correct?
His hands by themselves could possibly, I can't say that I've ever seen one fall quite like this, but could possibly, if he already had his hands kind of in front of him, it could fall back and they just fall into that position.
But knowing his injuries following the second gunshot wound, could he have intentionally placed his hands in that position?
Once again, Judge, I'm going to object.
I'll sustain the objection.
All right, that's fine. I think we've gotten there. Thank you. No further questions.
All right, is this witness subject to recall?
Judge, just for the moment.
All right, so since you're subject to recall, you cannot discuss your testimony with anybody, and you're still subject to the rule on witnesses, okay? All right, you can have a seat outside. Let's go ahead and take our afternoon break for 15 minutes. We'll come back at 3:30. Again, do not discuss the case with anybody and don't do any outside research, okay?
All right, you have been watching the Brendan Banfield murder trial. We are watching here on WUSA 9 Plus with you, and we are going to break down a little bit of what has kind of been happening. Frank Salvedo is here with me. Frank, that was a lot, all from the same woman, Miss Dolly Graff, and she's a forensic analyst. She specializes in blood stain splatter, and we've been hearing from her a lot. It really started to get interesting, though, in the last 30 minutes or so. Let's talk, though, let's back it up a little bit to right before we came back from the break. We heard the prosecutor questioning her. We then heard the defense take over, and he was just peppering her with questions. What was that all about?
What that was all about, anytime you have an expert witness, the court will sometimes allow you to ask hypothetical questions of that expert witness. So if the expert witness forms a particular opinion and has the credentials to express that opinion, the defense can then ask that expert a hypothetical question. And it looked like what Mr. Carroll was doing, the defense attorney in this case, was asking a series of hypothetical questions. Mm-hmm. Is it possible that XYZ? Now, XYZ, interestingly enough, was pretty much consistent with the defense theory in this case.
Right.
So he wasn't particularly concerned about the answer that she was going to provide. Mm-hmm. What was really interesting was that his hypothetical contained his theory. He put that out in front of the jury. So, is it possible that Joseph Ryan moved in this direction? Is it possible that Joseph Ryan was standing up? All of that, he didn't really care what the answer was. And she struggled over the answer, and they had a little back and forth. Mm-hmm. He really just wanted to put the question in front of the jury. He really used the hypothetical question rule to his advantage there.
Speaking of questions, we're getting a lot of questions from viewers. Again, we want to remind you, if you do have a question you'd like to ask, you can text us at 202-895-5599. So you can text those questions you have in as we speak, and then Frank will be here to try and answer some of those questions. Before we get to some of those questions, let's go to the last 5 to 10 minutes. We heard a lot from the prosecution asking this witness to talk about the specifics. Let's talk first about the part where she asks, would Mr. Ryan have been able to get up if he had been shot that initial time?
So she said that he possibly could get up after being shot that first time, although that was really a rapidly fatal type situation.
Right.
She said after the second shot to his chest, very unlikely he would have been able to move. The interesting part about that was that he was found, at least, with his hands kind of covering his chest. So what she was trying to tell the jury is that even if he fell in this peculiar manner with his hands over his chest, even if that happened, that wouldn't be consistent with the blood spatter patterns that were found. That suggests that the bodies were positioned, which is what the prosecutor is going to say. The prosecutor is going to say that post-event that Mr. Banfield staged the bodies in order to fit the narrative or the story or the version that he has told the arresting officers.
And I think it's important to note here when we're talking about this, she kept being asked about a Detective Leech. We heard from Detective Leech, I believe, on day 4, and he talked a lot about how he reviewed the body camera footage, and what he saw in the body camera footage was he saw reminder, not his body camera footage, the other officers, the first responders. He mentioned how he saw them kicking, moving the knife around. Understandably, they're trying to do life-saving measures in that emergency situation. But he also talked about Joseph Ryan's body and how Joseph Ryan's arms were crossed across his chest. Now, we obviously weren't able to see the images that this witness was able to see on the screen, but she talked about the arms being crossed. And it not only sets it up for what the prosecution has been saying of the manipulation of Joseph Ryan's bodies by Brendan Banfield, and then also what Juliana said when she testified. She talked about how at points Brenden picked up parts of Christine's blood. It's gruesome and awful to say, and then dripped it on Joseph Ryan. So we heard a lot of that questioning about those specific things, those little seeds that were planted earlier. They just said she could leave the stand, but that she would be recalled. Why would they want to keep her on standby to come back?
They may keep her on standby. I don't anticipate her coming back. I think the prosecutor did pretty well with her, especially on the redirect. I think they did a nice job with her. But as we talked about previously on the lunch break, it's important that the jurors are not easily manipulated or naive. It seems unusual in our own common sense that someone would fall backwards with their hands over their chest. That seems like an unnatural movement. Is it possible? The Commonwealth's own expert said, yes, it's possible, and it is possible. Right. At the same time, falling backwards with your hands over your chest tilts more towards a staging than a natural fall. We'll see. It's the afternoon break. I'm surprised that the prosecutor maybe didn't lead off with that versus end up with that, because it's been a fairly long day of expert testimony. Right. Maybe ending up with that, maybe they should have put that first, but I think that was a pretty strong point for them. I think Mr. Carroll may obviate that a little bit, maybe with his own witness. So it's just, again, a little tidbit, a little bit more circumstantial evidence that Mr. Banfield was kind of involved with manipulating the scene. Now, on the defense side,
right.
The police officers did come in. They were, of course, concerned about saving lives and seeing who was there and examining the decedents and just performing life-saving measures if possible. However, in that process, it wasn't perfect, right? They're kicking the knife, they're stepping all over things, there's blood that's being moved around and spattered in other directions. So that gives the defense some room to argue, well, the blood spatter evidence that she's talking about, the expert witness is talking about, maybe that's not the accurate scene. Maybe that's more the result of first responders kind of shifting the evidence intentionally or unintentionally.
I think it still goes back to that arms crossed though thing. I think we're going to hear more about that. And I was surprised they kept her up there all day. It started to get, dare I say, a little bit boring for a minute, but it really got interesting in these last 15 minutes or so. Where does the prosecution go from here? Are they going to bring this back up when we come back? I know they're not bringing her back up, but...
I don't think they're going to bring this back up.
Okay.
I think they're going to focus in on it on their closing argument for sure. I think they've got, one or two more witnesses to go. I would think there will be some emotional testimony coming up near the end. I think that's necessary for the prosecutor to kind of end up with some emotional testimony towards the end to kind of finish with a strong point. The interesting part, as we talked about previously, is what does the defense do? It's gone pretty well for the defense so far. Do they go ahead and present a case, or do they just say, you know what, it's gone so well, we don't want to open our case up to any cross-examination by the prosecutor? My guess is we'll hear some defense testimony, but probably not 20 witnesses.
Right. So I do believe that we believe that the next person to be called to the witness stand may be a family member of Christine Banfield. And obviously we'll know more soon, and then Frank will be here to kind of evaluate and recap what we heard in that time after the break. before court ends for the day at 5 p.m. But I do want to get to some of the viewer questions. A lot of you have been sending us your questions, and let's start with this one, and I think I can actually answer this one pretty well. But somebody asked, why is Juliana not in court? And Juliana's not on trial here. Brendan Banfield is the one on trial facing the murder charge, and Juliana had been called to testify. She was there for a day and a half, almost 2 days, testifying. But is there anything more to add? I don't know if maybe their question is, why is she not in the courtroom?
No, there's early on in the case, the parties imposed a rule on witnesses. So essentially what that rule states is that you don't want one witness sitting in the courtroom watching everybody's testimony and then being called to the stand, because then they know exactly what to say and how their testimony can fit in. The idea is each witness comes in individually without any influence from seeing other testimony to give their independent version of what they're going to testify to, whether it's an expert witness or a fact witness. Sometimes expert witnesses can hang out in the courtroom and kind of see the factual testimony and then provide their opinion on that. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. But for the fact witnesses, like Ms. Magalhães, she's going to remain where she is independently. They don't want to have her testimony influenced by seeing the other witnesses.
Another question we got, a lot of these questions are about Juliana. Somebody asked, why would law enforcement trust anything Juliana says? Is that a question you can tackle?
That's a good sign for the defense, I'll tell you that much. The focus now from that viewer's question, and maybe some of the jurors, as we predicted before, the focus is now on her, which is why I don't think he'll testify. But the focus is on her, and that is a pretty successful defense strategy. Can you believe anything she said? That's a pretty powerful question. Certainly imparts some reasonable doubt there. Now the focus, if the focus is just on Juliana, the defense is in good shape. The prosecutor is now, Juliana's way in the rearview mirror. They're calling expert witnesses and law enforcement and family witnesses. They are trying to put her in the rearview mirror so nobody really thinks about what she said. But yes, that's a very good question. If you're the defense attorney, you hope that's what the jurors are thinking.
Yeah, and somebody also asked if she could be hit with, can they still charge her? And we know the answer to that is no, they can't still charge her. She's agreed to this plea deal. But the follow-up question I think there is, can the sentencing be changed? So, part of the agreement was that she takes time served. Can they come back during sentencing and the judge say, no, you get more time?
That depends upon the language of the agreement.
Okay.
It seems like in this agreement there was a case called Santabello versus New York many years ago, where even a handshake agreement is an agreement. And the legal profession has morphed and changed and is certainly subject to interpretation, we've seen recently. But a deal's a deal, essentially. And if her deal specifically lays out the terms of that deal and that this is what the parties have agreed to, sometimes that deal is binding on the court. Sometimes the court does have some discretion. I would think in this case it was probably binding, but even in the situation where a court has some discretion, usually the court defers to what the parties have agreed to. The court, and the judge has done a great job in this case, is not really involved in the specifics of a deal or why a deal has been reached. The judge often doesn't know why a deal was reached. Well, maybe it was because some evidence was suppressed or wasn't going to be let in. Maybe the gentleman or the lady that wanted to reach the deal said, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and plead guilty and serve 2 more years instead of no more years. Right. The judge doesn't want to get involved in that back and forth. So I would expect that deal to be enforced, that she would get that lesser charge and that she would be released and deported back to her home country.
A question about Brenden we got. People want to know, can Brenden get lesser charges like she did? And, let me interpret a little bit. I'm guessing they're asking, can he take a plea deal this far along in a trial? Can you suddenly say, hey, I want to take a deal?
You can take a deal up until the jury comes back. And I've been involved in cases where perhaps the case didn't go as well as the prosecutor had envisioned. Every prosecutor thinks, in my experience, they have an ironclad case, and sometimes it gets right to jury deliberations, and the prosecutor extends you a very favorable deal just based upon the body language of the jury. So it is possible that they could extend him a deal that he might consider. I don't see that happening in this case. This seems like an all or nothing situation, but it is possible at the last moment if the prosecutor says, you know what, this au pair's testimony has been terrible. I'm getting bad language from this, body language from this jury. Maybe a jury instruction doesn't go their way that the judge is going to give the jury. It is possible that they would extend him some type of deal. Now, I would mitigate that with any type of offer that they give him usually has to be cleared with the decedent's families. I don't know if they would be willing to accept a lesser charge in this case, considering kind of the tragic and gruesome nature of it.
And the fact that they already accepted a lesser charge for Juliana. Let's go back to the early days of this trial. Somebody asked, why did police let him, I'm guessing Brendan Banfield, wash his hands? And we heard the officer who testified who allowed Brendan to wash his hands. We heard him say he felt bad for him. He was being empathetic. How crucial to this trial, to this case? They talked about it early on. It's come up a few more times. How important of a detail is that detail that Brendan was allowed to wash his hands before investigators could swab his hands?
I just don't think, I don't think that's going to carry the day either way.
Okay.
Last week, I kind of opined that that was a red herring, and I think the jury's going to look at that and say, listen, the officers had some sympathy for him. That could mean he was a good actor, or that could mean they legitimately had sympathy for him and he was a quasi-victim in this situation. Was it the best police work in the world? I think the defense attorney is going to say no. There should have been swabs done or whatnot. Maybe the defense is happy that there was no swabs performed. I don't think that's going to carry the day one way or another. That seems to be a fact that a juror may focus in on, but ultimately as the discussions go on in the jury room, I think it'll come out to that really doesn't matter to what our verdict is.
It's interesting because I've seen it come up several times now, just casual mentions of, hey, they let him wash his hands. And I was like, is there a sign that this is more to come out of this? And then I was curious myself if when they were talking about the knife today with the witness who took the stand, and they mentioned the cuts that would supposedly be on Joseph's hands if he had used the knife. Can we talk a little bit more about that? You know, we were looking at the photo of the knife. It's obviously a very gruesome photo. It's covered in blood. You know, how important of a detail is it whether or not Brendan, Joseph, anyone involved in this had injuries to their own hands, defense wounds, if you will?
Well, that could be the whole case. If you, not to take this to another gruesome level, but if you look at your average kitchen knife, if you took that knife and started stabbing an object, stabbing a pillow in your living room over and over and over, the odds are that that knife is going to slip in your hand and is going to cut your hand. So what the prosecutor was trying to get out is that there were no knife wounds on Mr. Ryan's hands. So if he was stabbing Miss Banfield over and over and over, odds are that the knife would slip and it would cut his hand. But looking at that knife, again, I think this is a little bit of a non-issue. Looking at that knife does seem to have a protective device there. So I wouldn't think anyone using that knife, unlike a regular kitchen knife, would have any type of slice or wound on their hand.
I guess it also begs the question of, was there a struggle, you know, whether it's the defense saying Joseph is the one who stabbed Christine or the prosecution saying Brendan is the one who stabbed Christine. You have to think that Christine was probably fighting for her life. It does look like the trial is back, so we're going to take you back in the courtroom.
Either the microphone or, yeah, good. Well, you can, but there's no jury here.
I guess when you went off the bench,
Okay.
was it, I've heard that you were going to have their last witness?
The last witness, and we'll see where we are at that point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. If it's only going to take a half motion,
Okay.
then start tomorrow with your case. Does that sound
sounds
okay?
good. That sounds good. I just
Good.
wanted to make sure, because I think there were people here
Okay.
that I had ready in the event.
Yeah,
but
I understand, but I think if it's
we
going
let them
to,
go.
if it's going to take till 4:15, I mean, I might
Yeah.
as well just excuse them.
Yeah,
at
no,
that
that's
point.
fine. I just want to be certain.
Okay, sure, no, I appreciate it. All right, thank you. All right, now.
Can you look while we're sitting?
All right, your next witness,
Your Honor, we have called Gary Benson.
Gary Benson.
Stand here, please, Madam Clerk, raise your right hand.
Swear or affirm to testify truthfully in this case under penalty of law.
I do.
Good afternoon, sir. Could you please state your full name and spell it for the court record?
Yes, it's Gary Benson. It's Garybbenson.
Mr. Benson, are you the father of Christine Banfield?
Yes, I am.
Who was Christine Banfield married to?
Brendan.
Do you recall when they were married?
Yes, they were married in June 12th of 2010.
Okay. Did they have a daughter?
Yes, and her name is Valerie Ava.
All right. And when was Valerie born? Do you recall that day?
March 30th, 2018.
Thank you. Were you present for her birth?
Absolutely.
All right. Where did that occur?
It happened at the hospital in New York, Good Samaritan Hospital.
All right. Remembering Christine's childhood, did you observe any medical symptoms that gave you concern?
Yes, several bruising, bloody noses.
Were they more than the average child's
Yes,
experience?
yeah, it was a concern to a pediatrician as well.
Judge, I'm sorry, I'm going to object about medical testimony.
Objecting to medical testimony.
Your Honor, at this point in time, he hasn't testified to medical
Okay,
information.
I'll overrule objection at this point. Yes.
Thank you. Tell me about the nosebleeds. What
They
did you
were,
observe?
they were frequent and very hard to stop. So the doctor was, why we brought it to the doctor to go over that reasoning.
All right. Did you have to do anything to help her with these nosebleeds and bruising?
Well, yeah, we would do normal, put ice packs on the back of her head, keep her elevated so that, until it stopped, which was prolonged. Took quite a long time for them to stop.
And after these experiences, did you seek help of a medical professional?
Yes, we took her back to the pediatrician who suggested that she be tested by
Without telling us what the pediatrician told you.
Oh, you just asked me what I did.
I
I'm sorry.
understand. So let me ask you
Okay.
that question. What did you do?
We took her to the doctor.
Okay. Did you take her to just one doctor?
No,
Okay. How many doctors did you take her to?
my recollection too.
All right. And after taking her to these doctors, did you form an understanding of why Christine bruised easily and her nosebleeds were difficult to stop?
Yes.
Okay.
Judge, I'm going to object. That's informed by the medical professor.
All right.
We should have here if we're going to.
Okay, I'll sustain the objection unless you have a different.
Yeah, Judge, if the
foundation.
objection is hearsay, there's an exception. If the objection is foundation, we can go farther into how he formed his understanding.
What's your exception to hearsay?
Sure, Judge.
If you want to approach.
So, Judge,
You can approach, please.
As a result of Christine's easy bruising and nosebleeds, did she need to take any precautions?
Did she take any precautions? Well, as parent, we took precautions to safeguard. When she rode a bike, she had to wear a helmet, knee pads, hand pads. Same thing with rollerblading. She was one that, when she was little, she liked to do all that stuff, but we restricted her from doing that because of all the injuries that she was getting like that. And so, that continued for quite some time, keeping a close eye on her.
Did you provide her with any medication to take?
She didn't take anything on a regular basis. There was no medication for it at the time to take on like a maintenance drug or anything like that.
I'm sorry, there was not a maintenance drug?
There was no maintenance drug for what was the cause of everything.
When she was little, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Was there a treatment drug?
There was a treatment blood, for the blood disorder, yes.
And did she receive that drug from you?
Not from me, only it was administered by a doctor.
Okay. To your knowledge, did she continue to have these issues as an adult?
Yes.
And what, if any, precautions did she have to take as an adult?
Well, she always had to be cautious and not take any contact sports, anything that would prolong any kind of injury, internal or excessive bleeding would cause a problem.
When she was pregnant and due to give birth to Valerie, were you present with her
Yes.
when decisions were made
Judge,
about?
I'm sorry, I'm going to object as to the medical care aspect of this, because I think we're getting into medical care.
I don't know if we are or not. I'll overrule it at this point.
When she was preparing for her delivery,
Yes.
were there any precautions that she took for that event?
Yes, she had to take medication.
And again, you were present during the delivery, is that correct?
I was in the hospital at the time, yes.
All right. Judge, I don't believe I have any other questions. Thank
Okay.
you.
Cross-examination?
One moment.
Sure, yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Benson. Christine, as an adult.
Can you speak up a little bit more? I can't hear you.
Thank you. Christine, as an adult, would play kickball and volleyball, correct?
To my knowledge, she did play sports.
Okay.
Non-contact sports, yeah.
Did she take any precautions like wearing helmets or anything like that, like when she was younger? In those
When she
sports?
was younger, she did. I don't know what she did as an adult when she didn't live with us.
Okay, so you weren't certain of her as an adult. How long had it been since she'd lived with you?
When she graduated college, she moved out on her own,
Okay, and so probably 15 years?
thereabouts.
Okay, and during that time, were you aware of her like competing in obstacle course type things called a mud run?
No, I'm not familiar with
Did you
it.
ever hear about it?
I'm not familiar with it, no.
Okay, it's kind of like a obstacle course where you're jumping over fences and.
Judge, counsel's testifying objection.
All right, I'll sustain the objection. Next
Okay.
question?
So you haven't heard about her doing any of those sorts of things, correct?
I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Or one moment.
Sure. All right, no further questions, redirect?
Just one redirect. Mr. Benson, you were able to testify that precautions were taken at the time of Valerie's birth. Was Mr. Banfield present at Valerie's birth?
Yes, he was in the room with her.
How is that redirect?
How is that redirect? All right,
It's just on.
I'll sustain the objection.
Thank
Any other
you.
questions?
No, thank you.
All right, Mr. Benson, you can have a seat in the courtroom. Thank you, Mr. Benson. All right, next witness for the Commonwealth.
Judge, Commonwealth would rest at this time.
All right, the Commonwealth rests.
Without asking the counselor if I can take that back for just a second.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Sorry. Judge, Commonwealth would rest.
All right, the Commonwealth rests. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a few housekeeping matters I have to take care of with the attorneys at this point, and that, based on the water issue, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go ahead and go home a little early today, okay? So please do not look at any of the media, do not discuss the case with anybody, don't do any outside research, and we'll see you early in the morning, okay? We'll continue on with the defendant's case, okay? Thank you.
All right, you just saw the Brendan Banfield murder trial wrapping up for day 5 of testimony. You see Brenden there, he's about to leave the courtroom. The judge just told the jurors they could go home. I mean, I feel like we were just here. So we heard they brought Gary Benson up to the stand to testify, and this is Christine's father. And we knew that he was going to be called to testify. But I think when we discussed it, we've been discussing it the past few days, we thought it'd be emotional. It was not very emotional. Let's talk about what was said. So the prosecutor asked Gary Benson about Christine's childhood, if she played sports, if she was, easily got injured, and he talked about how she bruised easily, got nosebleeds often. Why was that the question the prosecutors asked him?
I'm speculating.
Yeah.
It was interesting. We thought they would end with something emotional, right? We talked about that at the last break. My speculation is that because she had a blood disorder and bruised easily, and her dad, who seems like a completely wonderful person in the world, has indicated that she has had these physical problems for a long time, since she was a child. That she didn't play any contact sports, she didn't take part in anything that was of a super physical nature. I don't want to jump to what the prosecutor was trying to do there, but perhaps they were suggesting that a person with those types of physical limitations would not necessarily want to engage in the type of adult activity that is at issue here. That she was not one to perhaps participate in the type of fantasy activity that's involved in this case. Someone with that type of fragile condition. So kind of dancing around this issue a little bit, but I think that's what they were getting at, is that a person with these physical limitations would not want that type of fantasy situation with somebody on top of them in that type of scenario. That's what I think they're getting at.
Do you think that message, if you will, was clear to jurors? Do you think they're walking away confused, or do you think they understand, I know you're speculating, but what other reason could that conversation have been about? Do you think they understand?
I think they understand.
Okay.
Again, the jurors are probably the smartest ones in the room.
Right.
They understand the nature of that testimony. That could be very impactful testimony. Now, what we saw a little glimpse of is that the defense apparently has witnesses that are lined up, and there may be some evidence to contradict that theory that the prosecutor just put out. You saw Mr. Carroll ask about mud runs and mud events and those types of things, which for edification of the jurors or the viewers, those are very physical. They include running over obstacles and through the mud and whatnot. So I bet you that the defense will call a witness, or perhaps a police officer even, to elicit the fact that she did involve herself in some very physical activities. Again, we'll see, but it was kind of an interesting end to the prosecutor's case, and certainly a quick end. We had talked about 2 or 3 weeks of a prosecution case, and here they are 1 week in, they've just rested their case.
Yeah, and for hours we heard from a witness who testified about blood splatter, and then we expected Gary Benson to get up there. We thought it was going to be emotional, and it was just this quick thing to highlight that Christine was injury prone. I thought it was interesting, and we talked about it while it was happening, but we saw defense attorney John Carroll kind of hesitate when he said he had redirect. And we couldn't see what was going on, but we have seen what has been going on at that table. It's been Brenden and him talking. Brenden is very much involved in his defense. What do you think that conversation was?
I think that conversation went along the lines of many conversations I've had with my clients. I think the testimony was anticipated to be much worse than it actually was. Mr. Carroll had some objections that were sustained. So I thought the defense attorney was thinking, wow, this is going to be really bad. And it actually didn't turn out so bad during the direct testimony. I think he wanted to get up and say, no questions, I'm sorry for your loss, sir, and that's all I have. It seemed like his client really wanted him to ask some questions. So there was a little back and forth between client and lawyer, and Mr. Carroll, as usual, cool as a cucumber, stood up and asked some questions. I think that was probably the max that he wanted to do. I think he really wanted to do nothing. I think his client kind of fidgeted his way and kind of forced a couple questions to come out of Mr. Carroll's mouth. He did a really nice job. He placated his client. He still scored a point or two on cross-examination, and then he sat down. That was really nicely done.
All right, now Gary Benson had been in the courtroom, as we know, since day one. The judge allowed it. Now I think we understand why she allowed it. Do you think she knew, or why would you allow somebody who's testifying?
There's a special exception sometimes for the victim's family members to be there, especially if they're not going to give any factual testimony. He wasn't there that fateful day. He wasn't there before or after, so he wasn't really giving any present factual testimony. He was really just going to deal with historical testimony and maybe some emotional testimony about his relationship. So under those circumstances, sometimes the court will allow a family member to sit there. The judge did exercise her discretion to do that. That is sometimes done. His testimony really won't have much of an impact. It wasn't very emotional, really wasn't very factual, and I think even the factual part is going to be refuted later on. But he did get the opportunity to witness the entire trial, which I'm sure was really difficult. As we have talked about before, this is an absolute, no matter how this case turns out, it's an absolute tragedy for everybody involved, from the 4-year-old child to everyone that was involved in this situation.
And he's seen just incredibly upsetting stuff. I do want to talk about the moments before Gary Benson took the stand. We heard the judge say to defense attorney John Carroll, he was asking, hey, what's the timeline? I have my witnesses on standby. And we heard the judge say, you can excuse them for the day. We're probably not going to get to them. So I do expect that we will hear from John Carroll's witnesses tomorrow. We'll see how many. The judge did excuse the jurors for the day, so we will be back tomorrow morning. We will be streaming here live on WUSA 9 Plus starting at 9:45 a.m. Annie, you and I will be giving you a recap of what has happened the past few days through this trial, and then we will be streaming the trial live on WUSA 9 Plus, which you can download free to your smart TV, and on YouTube as well. So make sure you are tuning in. And of course, if you have questions for Frank or any of our legal experts, you can text those questions into 202-895-5599, and we will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9:45.